Have you always wanted to bake keto bread in the bread machine, but you're afraid to try for fear of making mistakes? Or you have made keto bread in the bread machine only to find out that it's gummy, lopsided, or deflated? Well, guess what? Today we're going to look at the 7 most common mistakes people make when trying to bake keto bread in the bread machine. Let's get started. Okay, the first mistake people make when baking keto bread in the bread machine is not giving the machine enough airflow. So it doesn't matter where you store it, just don't leave it there when you're baking. So I have a couple of machines, and one of them I have in a perfect shelf where all of my other equipment is, and actually is usable in that shelf. But the problem is it's surrounded by other appliances, so it doesn't have the airflow. And I love the convenience of that. I didn't even have to move the machine. So I'd take the bread pan out, I'd fill it full of the ingredients, put it in, close it up, let it go, and the breads weren't turning out right. And then I discovered it's not getting enough airflow. There's a reason why it has legs. It's to get airflow underneath the machine and around the machine. So store your machine wherever you like, but before you use it, pull it out into an area like this, for example, to give it lots of airflow. If it's stuck in between other appliances, it can overheat, which causes the bread pan to overheat, and that's going to affect the quality of the loaf. So if the bread cooks too quickly because there's no room and no airflow for the machine, then the loaf is going to be flat, cooking too quickly, dark, way too tough of a crust, and deflated and dense. So pull it out, make your bread, and store it back in. The second mistake that people make is not paying attention to the temperature of their kitchen. If you're baking bread in the summer and you have the air conditioning on, the temperature of the room could be too cold. And while the bread machine has a little bit of warmth in it to bloom the yeast, it may not be enough because you've got all that cold temperature around the machine, and that's going to affect how the yeast behaves in the dough during its first stages. So you always want to make sure that your kitchen is between 68 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit when you're starting to bake with your bread machine. And the same holds true in the winter. If your temperatures are too high and you try to bake, that's going to overheat the machine because it's got the heat in the baking tray or the pan and also in the machine. So temperature is very important. Make sure it's between 68 and 70 degrees, and always give the machine enough room and airflow. The third common mistake people make is not checking the dough. So the first stage your bread machine is going to take is, we call it the first mixing or the shaggy dough. So how will you know it's that stage? It's usually 8 to 9 minutes into the process, and then suddenly your machine will stop. That's because it's already roughly mixed the ingredients together and it sits for a while. And during that sitting stage, it allows some of the ingredients to hydrate with the wet ingredients in the dough. And it also helps the blossoming or blooming of the yeast. So what you want to do is just check the machine at that stage. So let it mix, then you're going to open the lid and you're going to check the shaggy dough. The fourth mistake is not paying attention to the hydration. So that's the stage where you want to open the machine, which is mistake number 3, you don't open the machine. Step number 4 is not checking the hydration of the dough when you open the machine. So you want to look at the dough. If the dough is too wet, it's going to be stuck to the sides of the pan. Just use your spatula, pull all the dough into a ball, and then you're going to start adding 1 tablespoon at a time of a dry ingredient. Which ingredient? Use the ingredient that is of the most volume in the recipe. So if your recipe calls for 1 1/4 cups of gluten flour or vital wheat gluten, that is the most predominant ingredient in the recipe. Everything else is under 1 1/4 cups. So you're going to add 1 tablespoon at a time of the vital wheat gluten, sprinkle it around the dough, use your hand and knead it in until you get the dough to the right consistency. Never do more than 1 tablespoon or the dough could become too stiff. So that's if it's too wet. If it's too dry, it's the opposite. You're going to add 1 tablespoon of water at a time and mix it until the dough is of the right consistency so that it's not too stiff. Okay, so what's the next one? The next one is not putting the ingredients in the right order in the machine. So that's a common mistake. So in keto low-carb baking, it's not the same as baking traditional breads in the bread machine. So with keto baking, we often use, in place of gluten, especially if you're making a gluten-free keto bread, we often use ingredients that form gels, flax, chia seeds, psyllium, and those gels really help to create a gluten texture in keto breads. But where you put them, those ingredients in the machine matters. So wet ingredients always go first, but if you add your chia seeds or your, well, wait a second, it depends on your machine. So I'll talk about the machine in a second. So when you add your first ingredients, you do not want to add your psyllium, your flax, or your chia seeds in with the wet ingredients and then putting the rest on top. This is specifically important if your bread machine preheats. So my KBS bread machine doesn't preheat, so it's not quite as important. So you put all your ingredients in. It's going to start mixing them together at the same time. But it's also nice to use a machine that has a preheating unit. They sit for about 30 minutes together, the ingredients, which is really great for keto low carb sourdough, because that preheating time allows more fermentation with your sourdough discard to take place in your machine. I love this Roji machine for my keto low carb sourdoughs because it sits for 30 minutes. Oh, I'm just spitting. It sits for 30 minutes before the machine starts. But if you add flax, psyllium, or chia to the wet ingredients first before the other ingredients are added, and then the machine sits for 30 minutes, that means for 30 minutes, that chia seed or the flax or the psyllium is going to start to hydrate and form a really thick gel before it's added to the other ingredients. And that can often make your breads very, very dense and they don't rise as effectively. And yet you use the same ingredients with the same amount of ingredients and put them in the right order and your bread will rise beautifully. So in your recipe, just look at your recipe. If you're getting it from me, they'll be in the right order, but you may want to transfer a recipe that's an oven-baked bread into your bread machine. Just make sure that you look at those. If it's a keto version, a keto bread, you want to see where your flax is, your psyllium, and you want to put that near the top of the machine. It's one of the last things you add. That way, as the dough is mixing, those gel-forming ingredients will form the gel with the rest of the ingredients. It'll all be cohesive, rather than having a clump of gel at the bottom and then trying to mix in with the rest of the ingredients, if that makes any sense at all. Okay, so that's the layering of the ingredients. Wet ingredients, then the dry. Take your gel forming ones and make sure they're not touching the wet ingredients to start off, specifically when you have a machine that preheats before it starts, like the Roji. Oh, I love this machine. Okay, looking at where you're going to add your ingredients in the pan. So you're going to look at how you're layering them, but also where you place them in the pan. So salt is one of the most important ingredients to keep in mind for where you're going to add it, which is around the sides of your pan. Don't just dump it in. This is especially important if you're making a keto low carb sourdough. Because you're adding the wet ingredients first, you're going to add the water, your keto sourdough starter, your eggs, whatever wet ingredients are going in first. If the salt were to touch the discard, the keto sourdough discard, aka starter, because it is the starter, but once you pull it from the jar, you're discarding it. So when it goes into the pan, it's now called the discard. So when that goes in, if you add salt, you're going to deactivate the fermentation in your sourdough discard. A perfect example is when you're making cheese. So the milk is heated up and then a sour agent is added to the cheese to separate the curds, the fat-soluble elements, from the whey. That's how you make cheese curds. It's the sour agent that causes the separation of the milk, and then you're going to pull the curds out, drain them, and so forth. They're going to still keep fermenting, and the fermentation will cause the curds to be more tangy until you halt that fermentation. And how you halt the fermentation in cheese making is to add salt to the curds. By doing that, you stop the fermentation at just the right spot so that the cheese has a specific layer of tanginess for that recipe. So every recipe is different, but the same holds true with your keto low carb sourdough starter. If you were to add salt in it right away, you're deactivating the sourness of the starter, and then it's not going to have the fermentation benefits in the bread. So the Roji machine is really the best machine when baking keto sourdough bread because it preheats for half an hour. You're going to put your yeast last in your bread recipe in the center at the top because you don't want the yeast to activate too quickly. You want it to mix slowly. It'll activate as part of the mixing and during the shaggy dough stage. You don't want that to activate too quickly, which then means that you're kind of wasting the yeast. It's not getting the chance to really work well. So how you put the layering of the ingredients is important, and also where you place the ingredients inside the machine makes a difference as well. Also with baking powder, you want to make sure that you don't touch the wet ingredients with the baking powder. Add those ingredients that cause the oven spring near the top of the loaf. Okay, so what else do we have? Oh, now here's an example, and here's another common mistake people make. The common mistake is taking a keto bread recipe that's meant for the oven and doing it exactly the same for your machine. Here's an example. You see how this is kind of lopsided, deflated? That's because I used the same amount of baking powder. And this gets a little bit tricky because it's not cut and dry. So I have this bread recipe. This is for the keto sandwich bread in the bread machine. And it's the same recipe to make an artisan loaf in the oven. And it both calls for 1 tablespoon of baking powder. So when I bake this bread in the KBS machine with 1 paddle, the 1 tablespoon of baking powder is perfect. It's a smaller space, it rises up, it's the perfect dimensions for baking powder. So it translates perfectly. So 1 tablespoon of baking powder in the oven recipe is the same as 1 tablespoon of baking powder in the KBS baking machine with 1 paddle. If I add 1 tablespoon of baking powder in my Roji machine, which has 2 paddles, look what happens. It rose, and then too much air was at the top. After the bread was baked, I pulled it out, and I could feel air underneath the top, and I knew it was going to deflate, and that's what happened. It deflated a little bit. Now, does that affect the taste of the bread? No. But would I give this bread as a gift? No. I'm going to eat this bread, but I'm not going to give it away. It doesn't look good. So the amount of baking powder you use is going to be affected by the machine you use and how you translate the oven recipe into a bread making recipe. And the same with yeast. So you want to practice. There is no one fits all recipe, because now you could say, well, I have a KBS machine, so I'm going to use the 1 tablespoon of baking powder. That may work, very well may work. But what if my machine is older and the heating element isn't quite as strong as your brand new KBS machine? Then it's going to affect how the breads rise in your brand new machine compared to how they rise in my machine, which is older. So there is no one size fits all recipe. I know I'm repeating myself, but you want to play a few times on how things are working in your machine at the time of year that you're baking, the temperature of your house, making sure that there's lots of airflow around your sheet machine. And also, that's very important when you're making keto, low-carb sourdough. There is no specific one-size-fits-all because your keto, low-carb sourdough starter behaves differently from day to day. Sometimes it's thick and clumpy because of the energy and environment. Other times it's very runny and it eats quickly and it has more hooch. Every day, your keto, low-carb sourdough starter is different. The same starter is different from day to day. So you have to behave differently in your baking from day to day. You want to pay attention to your starter. Is it wet today? Is it dry today? How is it going to affect the other ingredients? So pay attention. It's really meditation in baking because you're at one with your starter and at one with your dough and you're paying attention. I say that because a lot of times people think that keto low carb baking, specifically keto low carb sourdough baking, is like traditional baking. Everything gets weighed. perfect, the perfect weight for the wheat flour, and the perfect this and the perfect that, because baking's a science. Maybe that's true with wheat-based baking, but that is certainly not true with keto low-carb baking and keto low-carb sourdough. So, you know, trying to find a specific recipe that you can count on is not what it's all about. So, especially with a 1,000-year-old Italian monastery starter, were they actually weighing their ingredients 1,000 years ago on a scale? No, they were feeling everything out with their hands. And that's being at one with the dough. And that's what you want to do with keto low-carb baking and also keto low-carb sourdough baking. Follow the recipe. I'm not saying don't follow it. I'm just saying don't look at it religiously. You want to be in touch with all your ingredients and how they behave together from moment to moment. And that happens. Those are the common mistakes where you don't look at your shaggy dough to see what it needs. Just kind of put on your machine and take off out the door and go grocery shopping. It's not going to work that way. The bread machine is convenient. It's just not that convenient because you're working with a dough. Okay, I'm rambling. Okay, so the last common mistake, and this is kind of controversial. So the last common mistake is leaving the bread in the bread machine too long after it's baked. People say leave the bread in there, let it keep cooking. Other people say don't. I think you need to feel it out. If your machine is older, maybe the heating elements in the machine have worn out a little bit, it might be okay to leave it in a little bit longer. If it's brand new, those heating elements are going to be strong. Do you want to leave it out? Leave it in? Will it cause the bread to start cooking longer and making the crust thicker and harder to chew? So generally speaking, after the bread is baked, pull it out as soon as you can, flip it over onto the wire rack. If you want to check to see if the bread is done, you can always just put your finger in one of the little paddle holes and feel inside. If it still feels damp, you could put it in on manual for a little bit more time, 15 minutes, whatever you think it's going to need. So you could actually put your hand in the hole and go, okay, that feels a little bit damp. Don't leave the bread in the machine too long, because what will happen is you'll get condensation from the heat around the loaf and it'll make it soggy, and which will also deflate it. So what you want to do is you want to take it out of the machine, put your finger in one of the paddle holes, feel it. If it's not done, put it back in on manual for a little bit longer, or just let it rest, if it is done, to cool on its own on the wire rack, and the wire rack so that it has air flowing around it. Well, those are the 7 most common mistakes. I hope that's helped you a little bit in your keto low-carb bread machine baking. And stay tuned for the next recipe, because we're going to have lots of bread machine recipes, keto low-carb sourdough recipes that I know you're going to enjoy.